so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness which creates and animates all things. After years of exploring this awe-inspiring truth on this podcast, I'm super excited to announce that we are now going even deeper down the rabbit hole on the new late-night style consciousness-elevating talk show called Optimistic, which features none other than you, the listeners. Optimistic is taped out of the epic spaceship-esque 8-bedroom property we call the Mystic Manor that myself and the rest of the Optimistic crew now navigate reality from in Venice Beach, California. And you are invited to come experience a Mystic Manor immersion week with us. During your week-long stay, you'll enjoy unique workshops, chef-prepared meals, one-on-one time coaching and consulting with me, and even co-creating magic with me as a guest on both Optimistic and an episode of the Positive Head podcast. When I started this, my aim with these immersive retreats was to facilitate the ultimate spiritual upgrade and tune-up, so to speak, for our guests while providing them with one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. And I'm happy to say that as of this recording, every guest at the end of their trip so far has told me that they have had a profound and transformational experience at the Mystic Manor and that they definitely want to come back. All that being said, we only have a limited number of spots available between now and next July. And as of this recording, about half of those spots are already filled. So if there's any part of you that is screaming, yes, I want to come, I feel like I need to be there, go now and book a slot with me to discuss how we can put our heads together and make it happen at calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. I know for some people, there is also that little voice in their head saying, why not? I can't get off work. I can't afford it, and on and on and on. But, really Henry Ford, I think, said it best. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And I'm confident that where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm personally committed to doing everything in my power, including discounts and payment plans, to get you here if it is something that truly feels like a huge yes for you energetically and like you're meant to be here. Once again, the link to book time to discuss with me is calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. That's spelled calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. All one word, of course. And book in some time and look forward to seeing you soon here at the Mystic Manor.
Hello, all you positive heads. On today's P-Head Posse episode, our guest is positive head listener, Kristy Fernandez. Kristy is a mom of two, writer, educator, and entrepreneur. With the birth of her first son, Kristy realized that traditional parenting models did not resonate with her. So she's been on a journey of parenting mindfully and intuitively ever since. Her blog, EmpathMom, explores how spirituality, wellness, and parenting all come together in order to inspire others to live a more conscious and fulfilled life. Hi, Kristy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Alexa. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So happy you could join us. We actually met over on the other podcast that I host, Inner Bloom. And you came in there for us and did such an amazing job talking about parenting, specifically conscious parenting, which I know is just like the hottest topic right now, especially amongst, spiritually minded people, conscious people, especially this audience, the Positive Head audience. I know we have so many parents listening to this show, and I'm constantly seeing in the Facebook group, Positive Heads, constantly seeing people asking about like what to do about their children and how, well, we'll get into all that. But first of all, let's start with your story and, what your life has been like and what led you to doing what you're doing now with your blog and with conscious parenting in general.
Sure. So I grew up in New York City, born and raised there in Queens, to parents who are immigrants from the Dominican Republic. I had a pretty, strict upbringing, I would say. Have 2 siblings. I'm the middle child of 3. So from there, kind of just like worked at attaining the American dream, having that like very, my parents were very much, enforcing education on us and made sure that we stuck to like what they didn't have the opportunity to get in their own country. So it was very much just following that type of, those types of traditions growing up. And from there, I went into teaching pretty early. I graduated in English. I was a writer and I wanted to follow that path, but I didn't foresee like any stability in it. And because I was trying to fulfill like my parents, had like this kind of idea of what they wanted for us and like a career, like meant a job that you worked 9 to 5 or, that was very stable. So I ended up becoming a teacher because what's more stable than becoming
yeah.
That's a constant. There's always a need for educators. So I did that. I pursued a master's degree in special education and I did love it. I really always was drawn to working with children. So that's something that was always like a constant. Even my first job was like a summer camp counselor. And then I used to help do homework helper and like those kinds of things, which is what I did like through high school and college. So it was like a natural fit to go into teaching, and did that for about 8 years or so. And recently just felt like it was time for me to move on from that. But there's so much that I've learned just from having that as a career, just from the psychological aspects of dealing with children and just the relationship building aspect of dealing with children, led me into this kind of world of conscious parenting, basically, once I had my kids. So.
Awesome. And just for, those listening, maybe there's someone who's like, what the heck is conscious parenting? What is it? How do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as just, for me anyways, it was like my spiritual awakening happened when I had my child, I would say. Like, I've always been pretty spiritual in some aspects, but because of my parents were Catholic, or are Catholic and very traditional in the way that they follow religion, it never fully like felt right to me. Like there was parts of it like that I felt, I could feel like the power of the collective. And like when we were at church, like I can feel like the presence and the energy of it. And I always knew that there was something more, but the way religion like cut females out of it and like the lack of empowerment that you felt sometimes based on the words that they taught through the Catholic religion, like it didn't resonate with me. So for me, I had always been very spiritual, but up until I had my son, I didn't really like think about it because I was like, okay, I'm not going to church anymore because that doesn't align with me, but where do I get this fulfillment from outside of church? And I couldn't kind of figure it out, but I always was like reading about law of attraction and watching different shows and things like that. So that like piqued my interest. But having my son, once I had him, I was getting all this input because in Latino culture, we have so much like enmeshment, I would say, like families are very united. So I would get all this input from my mom and from my aunts and all this stuff on how I should be parenting my child. and it just didn't jive with me. So I had to like look for other ways to parent that felt more like what was in line with what I wanted. So that's what led me to a more like conscious parenting style, which is when you focus more on building the relationship with your child. And in order to do that, you need to like look internally and be conscious of your own triggers, the things that are like that you're projecting onto your kids. You don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about what it is that you need to heal within yourself in order to be the best parent that you can be for your child. So that's what I call conscious parenting or mindful parenting. Is a lot of little new key terms out there for it. So
yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting too, because I think, it's almost like I was getting this image in my head of how I think a lot of the time when people again, I'm not a parent, so I'm sorry if I'm like, I don't know, I'm saying this in a way that is perceived, I don't know, but it's almost like the idea that's been sold to us is like, well, when you become a parent, you're supposed to like know everything and have your shit together, and like, now you're the authority and you're supposed to like keep the kid in line. And it's almost like an ego trip a bit, it seems, looking from the outside. It's kind of like, when someone gets promoted to be a boss, right? And it's like, okay, now you're in charge of everyone and you're supposed to, and when that boss, for example, like gets into the mindset of like, I tell you what to do, like you work for me type of thing, it seems that it creates, there's a lot of conflict that brews up, because it's kind of this like me versus you thing. And I see this parallel between that and parenting where it's like, we have this idea like, well, now I'm the boss. And yes, you are, of course, responsible for your child. And yes, technically you are the boss, but there's a much more holistic way to work together and to have this sort of relationship where, yes, you are in charge, but it feels like more like guiding and more like learning from each other. And I feel like that's even happening in businesses now too. Like the structures are kind of changing where the employees are actually helping. It's not as much of a hierarchy. It's more like we're all working together type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just something that you said triggered something for me. Like when I became a mom, I was like, why is no one talking about how difficult this is? Like, why does no one, everyone is just literally walking around kind of having this, underlying maybe sense of misery because you can't figure it out, or you don't have it figured out. And everyone is pretending that they do have it figured out. And I guess that's kind of adulting altogether. Yeah. But it just totally worked for me. Like I would get together with like, my girlfriends and I would like bring up certain things that no one would talk about. And like me bringing it up was like, oh, thank God you just brought that up. Like, it's not just me. And so it's one of those things that I think is just like transparency is what is going to, move us all forward. Like it's enough with the, this pretending and this acting as if we all have it together because it's not serving anyone. Who's that serving at this point? The only way we can all grow is if we acknowledge where we are and learn from the collective, learn from each other. And that includes children, in my opinion. I think we can learn the most from children.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think that is?
Well, they're just so open. They don't have we have a lot of veils that we start to put on in order for society to like accept us or to feel accepted as we grow up. And I mean, it starts pretty young. Like I already see it with my 4-year-old at times where he's like looking for approval from certain people. Mm-hmm. And like before they go to school, you can kind of control that bubble. Like, that it's you. But once they start, venturing out, then you're like, it gets a little harder. So I always come back to, communication, making sure that we're communicating as much as possible back and forth, not just me, dictating or anything like that. Like making sure that it's an open, as he gets older, it has become more difficult, but I think, and he's still little. So yeah, it gets harder as they get a little bit older because the influences from outside is difficult to, you can't control that.
Yeah.
But I think the vulnerability aspect, like being open with our children, helps them know that you're a safe space, and then they can process whatever issues that they may face outside in the world with you, versus being that like antagonizer at home as well.
Right.
A lot of people have this mentality that you have to toughen up your kids. And I don't think that's fair to them. Like, the world is tough enough. As home base, you should be a safe space for your children to be able to come back to. But it's hard, because if you haven't processed your own stuff, then it's really difficult to face those things as a parent.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, the one thing that keeps coming up for me as you're talking about all this, I keep seeing the word duplication. And, in one of the businesses that I'm working on right now, that's one of the things that I'm learning about is like duplication. It's like whatever I do is what the people that work with me on the business are going to do, because and it's helping me see just in the larger way of like, when we live our lives are duplication. Like life is about duplications. It's just another way of saying whatever you put out is what comes back. Right. Like, so whatever you're resonating with is what's going to come to you. But a different way to say that is whatever you do is going to duplicate, right? However you are is going to duplicate. And so I see that with children, how it's like, however you are, it's going to duplicate in your children. Whatever's unprocessed in you, it's going to transfer to the children. And that's not to say, because then I think people can go, oh God, well now I need to be perfect before I have a child. I need to like literally like clean myself out. Or there's this image of like, just like, purifying yourself completely before you have a child. And, again, I don't have a child yet, but I'm planning to soon. And I don't, I'm aware of the fact, like, I'm still going to have things unresolved as I have a child. And that in fact, like, having the child is probably going to be part of learning more about those parts of me that are unresolved as we're talking about. So I don't feel like we're ever going to be like perfect. But I do think it seems like it's a whole nother level of reflection to have a child, because then it's so close to you. You can see it. It's such an easy way to see. It's so in your face of, what you're putting out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because I always say that your children are a mirror. They're a reflection of you. You honestly see parts of yourself that you've never saw until, you become a parent. And it's not to say I'm definitely not perfect. I don't think there are any, if there was, I don't think there's any perfect parents out there, or perfect people, because it's all about a journey. But I think just being open to reflection is the part that is like super important, because, and like taking away the pride aspect of it, being able to just have that, reflective moment of like, okay, was there a way I could have done this better? And apologizing to your children is okay. And I will always be like a proponent of that, because even as a teacher, like I saw the power of like, I lost my cool for a second there, guys. Like, I'm so sorry. And I taught middle school, so it was a little bit easier to have those conversations. But I was like, I'm so sorry, guys. I was having a rough day. I lost my cool for a minute, but now let's, get back on track in order to reach our goal. And then just kind of transferring that skill that I learned as a teacher into parenting. Like, okay, I lost my cool for a second. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Now what can I do to fix it? How can we move forward from this so that we can reach our goals, or we can get to where we want to be. It's really powerful for kids to see adults as people, because they generally do not. And, all the adult authority figures in their life have this posture of, I know everything and you don't. And so they don't see themselves. Like, how do you become an adult and then not really know how, like, I don't know the adults, I don't resonate with adults. Like, how many people do you know now that are like, I don't feel like an adult.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, me.
Me. I'm like, I'm about to be 30. I don't feel like I'm going to be 30, but it's like, because no one really ever showed that aspect of themselves that you can actually resonate with as you go growing up. It seemed like this big divide. But I think it's so important to model for children, for teenagers, that you're a complete person now. Even as a teenager, you are a complete person. As a child, you are a complete person, right? With time, you're growing and learning things, just like me and you are. You know, like we're considered adults, but are we done? Are we done?
Never.
With life?
Yeah.
No. So there's no this one spot that you want to be at. You know, you have to kind of help our children and the children in our lives see that aspect too. That like it's an ongoing process. You know, how many kids think that it's like about reaching a milestone or like, when I'm 18, I'm going to be an adult, but there's so much more to it. And like, it affects so much to not have like a model of what it is to just be like human, be vulnerable, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, I feel like you and I have talked about this before, where it's like when you become a parent, nothing has changed except for the fact that now you have a kid, but it's not like all of a sudden, like you've like transformed cellularly into a new being. It's in one way, yes, like you're transforming, but in another way, it's like you're the same. No new knowledge has been implanted into your brain automatically. It's not like a book was like downloaded into your head of like, now this is how you parent and this is how you are an adult and this is how it's like, you just now have another being that now you're learning about as I was taking care of a puppy earlier, and I take care of a lot of dogs. That's just like a part of my life. And one of my neighbors has a new puppy, so I was taking care of it, and he's like, dogs. So like and he had to go away, and he just got this puppy. So I'm sitting there with the puppy. And like I said, I've taken care of a lot of dogs, young dogs, but I had this realization today. I'm like, oh, I really haven't spent that much time with a straight up puppy that's been alive, a couple months. And I'm sitting there realizing like, you're a baby. Like, you don't know, like you're more self-sufficient, I would say, than a baby, but you also like don't know things, and you don't know that you have to eat. It's just a realization that it's like, and I'm sitting there going, oh, and I don't 100% know what to do with you, puppy. Like, but I'm learning just by sitting with you. Like, I'm learning just by realizing, oh, you don't know that. So now that's up to me to like show you that, you know what I mean? Or help guide you in that. And so I think just going back to this whole like adult versus young person thing, it's like, yeah, nothing's actually changing. And I think in the past, the generations have been like, straighten up, become an adult, like suit up, like, and really that ourselves are still under there. We're still under the suit. We're still under this persona, like you're saying, of the authoritarian person in authority. And so I feel like what we're talking about with conscious parenting and what you're highlighting is like, it's really kind of about getting back to that person that you always have been and realizing like that person never went anywhere just because you put on this persona, or just because you were told you had to become a parent now. It's like, maybe all that knowledge and the best types of parenting come, like you're saying, when you really tune back into who you are and, become stable and aligned within that. Because then there's no, there's less projections going out there. There's less, yourself, and you're willing to, like you said, get to know your child and willing to let the child teach you. And it goes back to that metaphor I was using about the businesses. Like the best businesses, I feel like, are the ones where the boss actually listens to his employees or her employees. Right. And they work together versus saying like, you don't know anything because you're an employee. It's like, that's another human being. They do know things,
Exactly. And that's something that, right. Like exactly what you were saying, like that's a big move and a big wave now. Like, what are you, how are you listening to your employees? Are you listening to what they have to say? Because they're going to give you the feedback that your company needs to grow or whatever. Yeah. So that's something that's so important in the family structure too. I think even bringing it into like the dynamic between you and your spouse or your partner, that's something, because a lot of times we talk about parenting like so top down, but how about your teammate? Like, how are you making sure that your partner feels seen, especially for, men have for ages kind of been pushed to the side when it comes to parenting. Or, I mean, you can look at it both ways. Obviously, women have been forced to be the sole parents in some ways, for a long time. But culturally, like, that's still a thing. Like, that's still a really big thing. Like, most things fall on moms. A lot of times people joke about, oh, like your husband is your third child or whatever,
Yeah.
those kinds of jokes. But like, that's really demeaning to men who are also full humans, right? But also full humans who are not necessarily given the space to explore their emotions and their feelings. And there's so much that shifts when you become a parent within the dynamic of your couple, your marriage, or whatever it may be. And that needs space to be explored too. Like, what's my role? What's your role? Like, when do I need to step back? That's something I had to learn because, growing up where my mom was like the caregiver, like when I became a mom, I was like really trying to hog all the caregiving.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to me, not because he wasn't capable, but because the model that I saw was like the man really wasn't that involved. So then for me, it was like every time he would try to do something, I'm like, no, you're doing it wrong. Or, let me do it because I can do it faster, or I can do it. I've been with him all day, so I know how to do it,
Yeah.
But in the end, he's a parent too. Like, he wants to have as many interactions and be as involved as well. And like giving him that space to like, to learn and like be able to, just also have his own ways and his own bonds with the child. It's like, it's really important to look at that aspect. Like, to me, it's just all about being more self-aware, being open to talking about things, because a lot of times you become a parent and it's just like this resentment starts to build up because I feel like I do more than you do or whatever. And like the babies come and now our relationship is completely different, which it will be, but no, it's something that you can't mentally really prepare for because you don't know what it's going to be like until it happens. But just having that foundation of like strong communication is so important, because then in the end, what are you modeling for your children, right?
Yeah.
You want to model for your children that you're a strong couple, or that you're able to work through issues. It all boils down to that same kind of, I would say like three things. It's like communication, collaboration, and then connection. Those are like the three things that I think are so important and fundamental just to build any relationship, whether it be, a partner, child, work related, friend,
Yeah. Love that. Something I would love to hear you talk about, because I think this seems like a really big thing that people are just kind of like trying to figure out the balance of, is discipline, right? Because I know a lot of parents in my world who they came from a family that felt strict, like they did, and they felt like their parents didn't communicate, didn't understand them, punished them instead of listening to them, right? So now they have children and now they're going way the other way, like way, right? Because they're like, well, I'm not doing it like they did it. And I mean, it makes sense. Like the logic of it makes sense. Well, I'm not doing it like they did it because I didn't like that. I didn't experience, I want my children to feel loved, right? So they go the other way in terms of not wanting to say no, not wanting to limit them, not wanting to make them feel bad or like they aren't loved, right? And so that can lead to a lot of then the children are kind of, like having having crazy tantrums, having, just a little out of control. And how do you find that balance? Like, what is your perspective on discipline?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a balance that needs to be struck. For me, at first, this was an area that I really had to explore a lot, because the way, my parents were very traditional. It was kind of like, they didn't necessarily spank, but it would be like, pat in the hand or a little pop whatever they call it, like something, it was more like behavioral training, right? Like literally like, don't do that. Don't touch that. You get a little smack on the hand.
Yeah.
And when my son, like, the first year they're angels, but once my son started like walking and like, doing normal toddler things, I like really had to figure out like, how do I guide him without, taking it too far, without like hurting him, which it's not really like, I just didn't believe in physical, physical punishment or anything like that. But it came down to like a system of having boundaries. And then also it's like you want to teach them the behavior prior to it becoming an issue. And that's the thing, is that as you're growing through parenting, you don't know what is going to become an issue or not. So it's just a lot of course correcting for me, at least at first, because it was like, okay, he would throw something. It's like, we have to show you, no, we don't throw when you're frustrated, try to use your words. But this is when they're a little older. So you want to like set boundaries is so important. Just like you do with any other relationship, you want to set boundaries. So talking about things prior to them occurring is really important. Giving them those steps of what you expect from them, what you want to see, modeling your behavior you want through your interactions with people. That's super important. And I think parents tend to not realize how much kids are watching them. Mm-hmm. So if you want a child who's, kind and all of these things, you can bring a lot of what you do into how you're teaching and guiding your child. So like a concrete example is like, if your child, screamed or yelled really loud, which is something that happens a lot when they start having tantrums, they'll like scream really loud. Teaching them the reason why that's not an acceptable behavior. So I always used to tell my son, like, "Ow, that really hurts my ears." Like, that's why you can't scream like that. That really hurts my ears. Are you trying to hurt mommy? And then they're kind of like, "Oh, my actions have a reaction or have a consequence." A lot of times kids don't realize, like, or they don't know yet what space they take up in the world. And like, they're constantly looking for validation, whether it be a negative or a positive. And a lot of the times, what I also realized is that if I took the time to make that positive connection, then I wasn't dealing with as much discipline issues, like issues of bad behavior or whatever it may be. Because you're filling up their cup. They need that too. They need to know that, like, I'm seen or I'm heard. Yeah. And that starts really young. Like, you can see it from a very young age. Like my youngest son right now, he's 8 months, and he, I see him looking up at me constantly to see, like, is this okay? Is this okay? And just like kind of giving those reinforcements, even starting at 8 months. Obviously he's not verbal yet, but like, just, the eye contact. You don't know how many people I've seen that don't talk to their babies because they don't speak back yet. It's so important to just talk to your baby, even if you're just narrating what's happening. We're walking down the street, whatever. Yeah. Those things connect so quickly for your children, and then it helps with their speech development. It helps with just them knowing that, like, okay, I can turn to an adult when something happens. Like, but a lot of people traditionally they don't think babies are people, right? Like, they don't think they're a full human yet. You're not a full human yet. You're going to become.
Could that lead to developmental issues as well? Like later talking, like, or connection issues, or? Absolutely.
A lot of the children that I worked with, were developmentally delayed and all those things as a special needs teacher. And then if you look back to their stories and their environment that they grew up in, like, a lot of them had, not to say that it's always this case, because of course, you can do everything right or whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah. Not to say that it's any parent's fault. Everyone does the best they can with what they have in the moment. But a lot of children do get speech delays because parents don't talk to them, or they come from a family where maybe like they're, they have a lot of siblings and the parent is constantly working or whatever it is. Like, the environment definitely dictates, the development of the child. And those first few years are so critical, so important for kids to develop really strong vocabularies and things like that. Like, people are constantly surprised about my son, my older son, because he's like a super strong reader, and like he has a pretty big vocabulary for a child his age, and we don't baby talk to him. We don't dumb down the language. We just, speak to him like a regular kid. And even though at times, like earlier on, he couldn't really respond the same way we spoke to him.
Yeah.
And still see that those connections were being formed, because children's receptive language forms faster than their expressive language. So even though my 8-month-old isn't speaking yet, he may be understanding more than we know.
Yeah.
So
wow. That's interesting. I mean, and it goes, again, it's like what you put out comes back, duplication, right? So like how you're speaking is how they're going, like modeling. And also it made me think of my own childhood, because I was reading at a very young age, and I was always extremely precocious. I mean, extremely, like I always felt like an adult, very young, at a very young age, like 4 or 5, I could always talk to the adults so well. And I was always making friends with adults because it was just so easy. And I think it's because I was an only child. And my parents, they always brought me around a lot of adults. And so I just kind of learned to, it's just interesting. Like it makes perfect sense when you're, when you're thinking about it. But yeah, that is interesting. Like people or just thinking like, oh, they haven't started yet. So like, right. But it's kind of like, it's like the, how it's always like, we're always talking in this community about, act how you want it to be, right? Like, so practice, even if what you want is to, win an Oscar someday, like practice your Oscar speech. You know what I mean? It's the same sort of thing. It's like, talk to your baby, like, even if they're not talking back. I love that. I love that.
I wanted to add too, when you were asking about like, how do you what's the balance? And like I said, communication, but always having kind of like that why behind what you're enforcing for your child, because I feel like it's so important to know that you're not just doing it because of some type of ego trip. And that's hard. That is definitely a hard thing to like work on for yourself, but it also is liberating in a way, because when you realize that it's like not that important, or it's just not what resonates with you right now, then you're like, okay, I can kind of let that go too. And it doesn't feel good to have to like enforce things that don't feel good. Like you're making your child feel upset and you're feeling upset. So then why? Go back to the why. Like, is this life or death? Is this going to really change the course of our life? If you enforce this. So like, it's just one of those things. I always say, go back to the why.
I love that. Because then also, like you said, it's kind of like checking in, like, is this because of what I think other people are going to think? Or is this because of what I really think? And like, you can feel the difference, right? Yes. And then I loved what you were saying earlier about explaining to, like, if the child is screaming, right? It's saying like, you're actually showing like what that's doing to you, like how that's physically, it's physically hurting you. Because like you said, I think I got this image in my head of how it's like, I think children are, like you said, they're just they just want attention. They want some acknowledgement of that they're there. And so they scream, because at least when they scream, they have like your parents' full attention, even if it's negative, like you said. So I love how, like, because I was a kid like that. I always wanted to know why. I always, like, just like you're saying, if someone just told me because I said so, that just set me over the edge. I mean, I couldn't handle that because I was a rule breaker. I always wanted to push boundaries, and I always wanted to challenge the norm. Like I never, even as a young child, I hated that. I hated that just because, well, no, you got to tell me why. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. All of this stuff, it's almost like we've been in this illusion, I mean, we have been. It's like we've been in this dream of like, well, because I said so, because the government said so, because your teacher said so, because whoever said so. And it's almost like everyone's just saying, because this person said so and this person said so. And now all of a sudden it feels like we're kind of waking up and going, oh, that doesn't make any sense, actually. And everything. It's not real. Just
everyone's waking up from the matrix.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like this stuff, when you hear it, it resonates in such a way. You're like, oh yeah, that's right. Because that really feels like that makes sense. That makes a connection. And, well, so is there anything else before we, start wrapping up here? I love this conversation. And I'm sure a lot of people listening are like eating this all up right now. Is there anything else that you feel is important for conscious or mindful parents to be aware of, or anything else that you see that comes up quite a bit for them that you think would be helpful to know?
I would say putting yourself first and making sure that you take the time to like figure out who you are within this new paradigm of parenting that you've suddenly been catapulted in, because it could be shocking. Like sometimes, I literally remember, when my son was first born, they just like, okay, 2 days after you've been in the hospital, like go home and now he's yours for the rest of your life and figure this out. It's like, it's really difficult. You tend to lose yourself if you're not careful to like go back to checking in with yourself. Who am I now? Who am I now? Like there is a huge growth that happens. It's a huge learning curve. And I'm constantly rewriting this idea of who I am and what I need in order to be the best version of me, in order to be able to have the patience and have the presence that I want to have for my children. Like it just takes a lot of reflecting, and take those times, take that moment, whatever it is that is you, don't try not to lose it. There's seasons though, there's times where you might, but just come back to it, redefine that, and just, stay grounded in who you are in order to be the best parent that you can be, and always be open to learning. I think that's the main thing. Like you never have it figured out. So. Yeah.
And maybe just knowing that, like, no one has it figured out, even the people that act like they do. They don't. It's like being in school or something, or you're just constantly, just in general, like the idea that we ever finish that's why I think the idea of retirement is so ridiculous. It's like, what are you going to, so what? So then you're just done. You're just done.
And also what we do to children is like, what are you going to be when you grow up? It's like, we are a career, choose a career or major that's like, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I remember feeling like that. Like I have to figure this out.
Yeah.
In order to have it. And I think, what is it? What is it?
Yeah, what is it? I was talking about this with my parents, how it's like college is almost starting to seem a little outdated in certain ways. Only like just one aspect is specifically like the fact that you're supposed to come in and say, I want to do this for the next 4 years. And after that, and not saying that can't happen, but like the generation that's going to college now, like their attention span, even me, like I'm 32 and I want to do different things all the time. Like my interests it's always kind of related to the same stuff, but I'm always thinking up new things and kind of hopping around. And it's like, I cannot even imagine what like an 18-year-old is like right now going to college. Like they're not going to like the same thing in a year. Probably not. You know what I mean? And that's, And that's
like, I don't remember, like, what did I like when I was 18?
Exactly. And so I think that's, I think that's great advice just for everyone to know, you're always evolving and no one ever has it 100% figured out. And that's why communities like this one and resources like this podcast are so essential and become like pillars of people's lives. Just they become so essential to each day, is because it's a way to constantly like learn and connect back and reflect back on who we are, like you're saying, which is so important to do. And it also shows other people that are doing other examples of people that are doing that. So we can constantly remember, no matter what's going on out there, no matter what's going on in the media, no matter what the media is projecting or whoever's projecting, is that like, this is actually reality, the ever evolving human, no matter if you're a parent or a pet owner or, you're a boss or whatever it is, always learning and growing. So I think that's beautiful. And Kristy, tell us like, where can people find you? Where can they reach out to you? How can they get more of your goodness?
So my blog is EmpathMom.com. And I also have the Facebook page, EmpathMom. You can friend me on there, Kristy Fernandez as well. And then I have an Instagram page by the same name, EmpathMom. So I'd love to hear from everyone. This community has been like a huge step in my growth as well, and helped me like become more of like step into who I really truly feel like I am. I've always been like super shy growing up, and Positive Head has helped me kind of break out of that shell, which is amazing. So I'm super excited to be on here, and I love talking to people from the group. So
Yay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom. I love this episode. I really think people are going to respond very positive headily to this. So yeah, we'll put Kristy's links in the show notes. So you should be able to click there and find her and definitely reach out to her. And Kristy, thank you so much for being on. We appreciate you. And until next time, love ya.
And if you're feeling the call to come for a week retreat style Mystic Manor immersion, remember to go now and book your time to speak with me directly about stepping into the optimistic vortex at calendly.com/talk with Brandon while there are still spots left. Otherwise, I look forward to co-creating magic with you at the Mystic Manor.